continues our investigation into the money trails behind tax-exempt organizations failing to operate within their stated tax-exempted purpose and sowing chaos, fueling anti-Semitism, and interfering in elections across America. We have held hearings exposing many of the main players who use their tax-exempt status in concerning and problematic ways. We've passed legislation out of this committee with strong support from Republicans and Democrats to hold bad actors accountable. We referred, in fact, 11 tax-exempt groups to the Biden and Trump IRS, the same ones, for investigation and possible revocation of their tax-exempt status. What our investigations have found should disturb every single American. Certain tax-exempt organizations funded by foreign donors are exploiting their lucrative U.S. tax benefits to incite violence and unrest in our communities and destabilize our political process, all to the benefit of the foreign flags their donors fly. Several, including Alliance for Global Justice, which I called on the IRS to revoke the tax-exempt status of, are suspected of having ties to terrorist groups and using those close connections to funnel resources to support terrorism. Groups like Sammy Dune, a sham charity affiliated with the PFLP and designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. Treasury. These are all facts. This is reality. Other tax-exempt organizations are masking. They're masking the flow of foreign money by allowing separate entities to utilize their tax-exempt status in order to hold riots across the United States, featuring intimidation and violence. Many of these groups, like American Muslims for Palestine, were contributors to the harassment and violence towards Jewish students that plagued elite universities. Several other tax-exempt groups intentionally direct millions of dollars in foreign money to sway our elections. One foreign national, a Swiss billionaire, gave over $200 million to a 501c3 foundation and related 501c4 to help, quote, Democrats win the White House and control of Congress. Many of these tax-exempt groups also have documented ties to hostile foreign governments, like the Chinese Communist Party. The People's Forum, an American tax-exempt group who I demanded documents from in September. It hosts events and courses pushing Communist Party propaganda, incites violent protests and riots, including disruptive occupations of college campuses, and publicly supported Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack against Israel. And it's no wonder that the People's Forum echoes Communist Party propaganda. One of their largest donors is a wealthy former U.S. tech executive living in Shanghai who is cozy, extremely cozy with the Chinese Communist Party. Neville Royce Singham and his wife, a co-founder of Code Pink, donated over $20 million to the People's Forum through shell companies and donor-advised funds to hide the original source of the money. This committee has worked tirelessly to unravel the Singham CCP network. Just last night, I sent letters to Tricontinental and Breakthrough News two organizations that are part of this regime of CCP-linked nonprofits operating in the U.S. Each one of these groups has the same thing in common: foreign actors fueling disruption and illegal activity in America using a dark web of tax-exempt groups. And all this disruption, the chaos and hate, is subsidized by the American taxpayer. Nothing about today's hearing should be partisan. Republicans and Democrats should work together to stop foreign actors from interfering with our politics and public discourse through nonprofits. The people who want America weak, they want America divided and torn apart, would love nothing more than a partisan battle on this subject. This is not politics. It's about national security. The manipulation and abuse of tax-exempt status by foreign nationals is absolutely unacceptable. Tax-exempt status is a privilege, not a right. To the tax-exempt groups who set out on a mission to provide benefits to communities, we are encouraged by the good work that you are doing. To the tax-exempt groups hiding in darkness and stirring up unrest in this country, know that this committee is coming for you. We will not hesitate to use every tool in our toolbox to root out the foreign influence lurking in America's tax-exempt sector. I want to thank our expert witnesses for coming to testify today about how foreign individuals, organizations, and even nations are taking advantage of our tax-exempt sector to destabilize the United States through our own tax code. I'm pleased to recognize.
As a government built for the people. Today, this hearing is being held on the pretense of what happens when tax-exempt dollars are funneled from group to group, only that you disagree with. But much more pressing should be the decisions that are no longer being made for the American people, but in service to the president's demands. That expands across affiliated nonprofits and for-profits alike into wide-ranging transactions with foreign governments, including real estate, crypto, and numerous business ventures. Right now, it's impossible to talk about nonprofits in America without acknowledging those that are tied to the president: the Presidential Library Foundation, the Inaugural Committee, the Trust for the National Ballroom, to name but a few. And while we're on this topic, everybody on this committee and every member of Congress that I'm aware of, they are opposed to anti-Semitism anywhere that it attempts to grow. Let's talk about a few of these high-dollar examples. $400 million, a private jet given to the president personally, a tax-exempt organization from Qatar offering the jet. This donation apparently has been linked to several deals from the administration, including a $142 billion arms deal and a deal for AI chips, despite national security concerns. $5 million donation to the Trump Inaugural Committee. This pattern of foreign influence continues to the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being funneled to the Trust for the National Mall, a tax-exempt organization collecting contributions for the Trump Ballroom. Among the donations that have been publicly disclosed, there are two notable ones from the Tether America, a U.S. subsidiary of an El Salvador-based company, and Syngenta, a subsidiary of another owned foreign company. Certainly, the administration has put up a for sale sign, and many countries apparently are responding. As my colleagues on the other side of the aisle stated, Americans deserve assurance that presidents won't be bought and sold before leaving office, particularly as they still hold immense international power and influence over American policy. We could not agree more with that statement. All of this is just the tip of the iceberg of this profiteering. According to estimates from the New York Times, which they acknowledge is only based on what is publicly available and likely an underestimate, the president has used the office for his family and himself to enrich them by $1.4 billion. That is 16,822 times the average income of the American people. How's that in terms of serving the people? Real national security threats are going unexamined on Republican watch right now. The administration admits to mishandling the people's sensitive data as it relates to Social Security, I want to add. Last year, one of our Republican witnesses went on Fox News and couldn't be more impassioned about the national security risk from foreign governments regarding donations to American universities. That is something we all need to pay attention to. We agree that there's an important interest in identifying a foreign actor with shady motivations. We look forward to hearing the perspective today on a $400 million private jet from a country that was given to the president. We need a serious and good faith conversation about this influence as it's peddled. It's bending politics to the benefit of the well-connected and certainly costly to the American taxpayer. What is happening this morning is disingenuous. It's a cherry-picked exercise to legitimize the White House's crusade to silence the opposition, always, by branding anyone who disagrees with them as a threat or even a domestic terrorist. We've already seen how this has been weaponized for the power of government to target opponents and enemies as professed. We can't be party to another performative effort that continues to ignore the president's abuses. And with that, I yield back my time.
Invitation to testify on foreign threats and influence in the nonprofit sector. My name is Caitlin Sutherland, and I am the founding executive director of Americans for Public Trust, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to uncover and publicize foreign money and influence in politics and policy. Foreign nationals, foreign charities, and foreign governments are actively exploiting loopholes to funnel their foreign dark money into important American policy fights, institutions, and electoral tools, and they're utilizing the nonprofit sector to do it. Over 40 years ago, Congress banned foreign nationals from directly or indirectly influencing our elections. And while federal law is still inadequate when defining what foreign nationals can and cannot do in the electoral space, it is even worse to non-existent in the nonprofit policy space. The unprecedented rise of foreign donations to nonprofits should be a concern to every American. Tax-exempt organizations, most commonly 501c3s and 501c4s, are important institutions in our modern society. They are supposed to serve as charitable backbones in the community, educate the public, and promote the common good. And yet, they've been co-opted by foreign actors who are quietly driving radical changes right here in America. This threat of foreign interference is not a hypothetical one. In October 2025, Americans for Public Trust released a report on how just 5 foreign charities spent almost $2 billion bankrolling U.S. policy fights, litigation, research, lobbying, and protests. The foreign money identified in this report originated from foreign charities and foreign nationals in Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and Denmark, and then flowed into the United States, mostly through 501c3s. One of those charities, KR Foundation, wants to, quote, popularize a shared vision of how cities could be much better places to live without private cars, end quote. And they financed numerous climate protests and litigation. The Switzerland-based Oak Foundation poured $650,000 into the 501c3 Environmental Law Institute that houses the Climate Judiciary Project, which has faced accusations of training judges to rule favorably on climate litigation. And the UK-based Quadrature Climate Foundation sent almost $50 million to the 501c3 Windward Fund, in part to, quote, to support, quote, environmental justice advocates in the US, end quote, and for calling for diet shifts away from red meat to plant-based proteins. Abolishing private cars, eating less meat, training judges, protests, suing energy companies. These are just a few examples of what is being financed by foreign money, and it must stop. Notably, after Americans for Public Trust exposed how British activist hedge fund manager Christopher Hone funneled over $500 million into US-based organizations, he announced he would no longer be financing US causes in the future. But the damage with his foreign money has already been done, as he's been bankrolling advocacy campaigns and pushing a radical green agenda for over a decade, all while he and his charity maintain close and questionable ties to communist China, work with CCP officials, and support the CCP's Belt and Road Initiative. While it is a fantastic victory that Hone was called out and shamed into changing course, it is simply not enough given the influx of foreign money coming into the United States. We must have more guardrails in place to protect our democracy. Another ever-present threat to American politics is Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Wyss. Mr. Wyss, who once said he, quote, never felt the need to become an American, end quote, has instead, as stated in his biography, found a way to, quote, exert an influence on American domestic politics through his foundations, end quote. The precise reason this Swiss billionaire or any other foreign billionaire can do this is because foreign money running through foundations and nonprofits to influence policy and advocacy is not prohibited. This has allowed Mr. Wyss to keep the lights on at numerous left-wing nonprofits around town, including giving $280 million to 1630 Fund, $30 million to the League of Conservation Voters Network, $9 million to the ACLU Network, and $7 million to Indivisible, the chief organization leading nationwide protests. How these tax-exempt organizations can simultaneously raise and spend hundreds of millions of dollars from foreign actors, be it from Switzerland or China, all while seeking to influence policies in our backyard, is a problem worth solving. I look forward to discussing ways to prevent foreign influence in the nonprofit sector.
America's nonprofit system rests on citizens who want to make this country healthier, safer, and stronger without being taxed to do so. It's trust between Americans that builds hospitals, educates children, cares for the vulnerable, supports churches, and strengthens communities. Nonprofits were never intended to organize street violence, clash with police, shut down infrastructure, block hospitals and airports, or serve as proxies for foreign governments. I'm Adam Sohn, co-founder of the Network Contagion Research Institute, and today I'm going to explain to you how the trust between Americans are being broken by foreign enemies. By using data science to identify and mitigate these information threats, I'm going to show you two case studies. One, CARE, and the second, Neville Roy Singham. And you'll see how foreign influence has penetrated America's nonprofits, exploiting tax-exempt status not to strengthen our communities, but to weaponize them against the United States itself. The Council on American Islamic Relations presents itself as a civil rights group defending Muslim Americans. CARE affiliates acknowledged receiving millions from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait, countries with clear stakes in U.S. politics, without registering under foreign agent laws. Since 2022, American taxpayers have largely replaced CARE's former donors. In California, CARE's largest chapter received nearly $30 million in public grants, including $7.2 million in federal funds meant to help Afghan refugees who supported the U.S. mission abroad. CARE California promised to serve 1,800 Afghan refugees, but served just 177, less than 10%. Yet CARE California still spent most of the money. More than $3.7 million circled back into CARE's own offices, and for what reason, they don't say. CARE California's director, Hussam Ayloush, submitted a signed statement to Congress just last month denying that CARE managed the Afghan grant or controlled the distribution of the money. But that statement appears to be false. Grant documents explicitly named CARE California as the administrator. CARE California controlled the funds. That appears to be a material misrepresentation to Congress. So why lie? Because transparency would show the tax dollars were funneled to groups like the Muslim Brotherhood affiliate, the Muslim American Society, MOS, an organization whose events feature Hamas leaders appearing not on most wanted posters, but on T-shirts and buttons for sale in hotel lobbies. CARE also used tax-deductible donations to shield college students suspended for vandalism, harassment, and violence during street and campus protests, receiving $1,000 grants and interest-free loans from CARE. So instead of facing consequences, students got paid. This is what nonprofit capture looks like when it matures. Foreign money builds the network, taxpayers unknowingly keep it alive, and civil society bears the cost. Neville Roy Singham represents a different threat. Born in Connecticut and became a near billionaire in the United States, Singham relocated to China and now operates as a CCP-aligned influence agent, coordinating U.S. nonprofits to destabilize American society from within. Singham attended Chinese Communist Party propaganda trainings, shared offices with Chinese state media in Shanghai, and exploited U.S. tax law to move tens of millions of dollars through donor-advised funds, primarily via Goldman Sachs. And together, These entities form a coordinated $100 million system, the Singham Network. The Answer Coalition and the Party for Socialism and Liberation mobilized the protesters. The People's Forum trains and coordinates the activists. Breakthrough News handles messaging and media amplification. The impact of this money is ongoing. Federal property vandalized at Union Station, American flags burned and police officers assaulted, airports blocked at JFK and LAX, Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges shut down, ambulances and commuters disrupted, Wall Street blockaded, holiday commerce halted at Macy's Herald Square, and immigration and law enforcement facilities targeted. This is not grassroots protest. It is a repeatable system for paralyzing American infrastructure on demand, financed through U.S. tax law and aligned with a hostile foreign power. It is an active vulnerability we cannot afford to leave intact. We face a significant national security vulnerability. These cases are not anomalies. They are expressions of the same structural failure. This is not protected speech. It is engineered subversion, shielded by 501c3 status, obscured by donor-advised funds, and embedded in state-funded institutions. This committee has jurisdiction over the tax protections that make this possible, and therefore the responsibility to act. Revoke tax-exempt status, clarify what activities do and don't qualify as tax-exempt, enforce foreign agent registration laws, and shut down the financial pipeline.
Here before you as a forensic accountant with decades of experience investigating fraud and financial misconduct across a wide range of organizations, including tax-exempt organizations operating under various sections of the Internal Revenue Code. To appreciate the magnitude of the issue before the committee, it's important to understand the scale of charitable giving in the United States. According to the Giving USA Foundation, total U.S. charitable giving in 2024 exceeded $592 billion. The fact is that it's extremely difficult to determine how much of that money originates from foreign donors. For most charitable organizations, donors' identities reported on their Form 990, Schedule B, are not publicly disclosed. As a result, we simply do not know how much foreign money is flowing through the U.S. nonprofits or for what purposes. This lack of visibility creates real national security risks when foreign donors, including foreign governments, state-linked entities, sanctioned actors, or cutouts, use charitable structures to move money, gain influence, or mask illicit activity. While foreign donations must comply with U.S. sanctions, anti-terrorism, and anti-money laundering laws, this is an area with limited transparency and limited scrutiny. That combination makes the system vulnerable to abuse. For example, foreign state-linked donors may seek to shape U.S. public discourse or policy by funding nonprofits engaged in advocacy, research, community organizing, or media-adjacent work. Even when activity is not criminal, opaque funding can create significant influence while obscuring who is behind particular agendas. Money moving through nonprofits is like shipping containers moving through a port. You can count what comes in and what goes out, but without targeted inspection, illicit activity can be hidden inside legitimate flows. If you cannot identify the original source of funds or clearly see how those funds are used, the system can be exploited in harmful and unlawful ways. A central driver of this problem is the current reporting framework. Most tax-exempt charities satisfy their federal obligations by filing an annual Form 990. While Form 990 provides high-level aggregated information, it is not designed as a forensic tool capable of detecting financial malfeasance. Bad actors understand this. They identify weaknesses and structure misconduct to blend into otherwise lawful operations. In my experience, fraud flourishes where reporting lacks granularity and enforcement resources are limited. This vulnerability is particularly evident in fiscal sponsorships. As you'll see on the screen, a fiscal sponsorship allows a public charity to extend its tax-exempt status to a separate project run by some other entity that is often not itself tax-exempt. When a public charity fiscally sponsors a project, the sponsor is legally responsible for controlling and overseeing how funds are used and how activities are conducted. If it cannot explain where the money went or what the project actually did, the sponsor faces serious exposure, including loss of exemption, excise taxes, civil penalties, and, in extreme cases, criminal liability and personal exposure for officers and directors. Yet current law imposes no requirement for separate project-level reporting of fiscally sponsored activities on Form 990. There's no dedicated line or schedule for fiscal sponsorships, so these activities are absorbed into aggregated reporting, producing little meaningful transparency. Transparency is further reduced by the growing use of donor-advised funds, which separate the identity of the original donor from the recipient organization. In many cases, Grants from donor-advised funds to operating charities are made anonymously, further obscuring the flow of money. In my professional judgment, these vulnerabilities warrant legislative attention. One practical and cost-effective remedy would be to revise Form 990 to include standardized questions focused on fiscal sponsorships, donor-advised funds, foreign operations, and pass-through funding structures. These disclosures would generate structured data that the IRS could analyze using modern tools, including artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can help the IRS identify risk patterns that would otherwise go undetected and allow the agency to focus its limited enforcement resources where they are most needed. Properly deployed, AI would function as a screening tool, much like fraud detection systems used by financial institutions, flagging unusual patterns for human review while leaving compliant charities untouched. Combined with improved disclosure, this approach would allow the IRS to proactively identify risk, allocate resources more efficiently, and strengthen oversight without impeding legitimate charitable.
It's refreshing to have a hearing where all witnesses share strong agreement on a central point, namely, foreign money should be kept out of American politics. Mr. Weissman urges passage of the Disclose Act, in part because it drastically limits foreign political spending. Ms. Sutherland deplores political spending by Swiss foreign national billionaire Hans-Jörg Wyss. Mr. Sohn objects to past funding from Middle Eastern countries to the Council on American-Islamic Relations, and I criticize domestic environmentalist groups' ties to the Chinese Communist government. A lot of these problems involve America's nonprofit sector, which is traditionally a glory and a strength of this exceptional country. But foreigners abuse this sector, especially tools like fiscal sponsorship and donor-advised funds, which aren't inherently bad things, in order to hide their influence ops. Americans' homegrown groups also exploit those tools. Recall the politicized multi-billion-dollar nonprofit network operated by Arabella Advisors, one of whose presidents admitted their business model, which heavily uses fiscal sponsorships, is, quote, a workaround to the tax regime. This same Arabella network's first major funder, whom we can discern, was Hans-Jörg Wyss, the Swiss foreign national and Democratic megadonor Ms. Sutherland discusses. A big part of the problem is so-called campaign finance reform. It greatly narrows money flows into hard dollar entities like political candidates and parties, but it places no restraints on 501c3, private foundations, and public charities. This preference for the charitable sector is explained by the fact that 8 billionaires, all with the same last name, Foundation, gave almost all the money to pass the last campaign finance law, McCain-Feingold. That law hurts both political parties and drives anyone seeking to influence our politics to send money not to parties and candidates where it would be disclosed, but into nonprofits where the money is hidden, sometimes under multiple layers, and also where the money is unlimited, both in dollar amounts and also in its source. Foreign governments and foreign nationals like Hans Wyss can give unlimited amounts. As one left-wing activist admits, the law that forbids using C3 charities for electoral work is a joke. Quote, philanthropy can help win elections, pass legislation, enact policy, decide court cases, shape press coverage, catalyze protests, smear your enemies, boost your allies, and even help set the overall cultural direction of American life. New York Times reporter Teddy Schleifer agrees, confessing 501c3 charities, quote, are often surprisingly as much a part of big money politics as your neighborhood super PAC. Some left-wing practitioners celebrate the collapse of the traditional separation between charity and politics, including Eric Kessler, who founded the Arabella network of left-wing nonprofits. In a case study of the business he paid for, we read that when Arabella was founded in 2005, most donors still equated philanthropy with giving to charity for community purposes. But he and his business partner, quote, saw things differently. They were obsessed with bold change-making strategies, advocacy, and innovative methods, like fiscal sponsorship, that would, quote, soon help billions in new philanthropic resources from left-wing billionaires, foreign and domestic, flow into the nonprofit field with unprecedented velocity. It's undesirable when Americans produce this pseudo-philanthropy and manipulate our politics through it. It's far worse when foreign donors are involved because nearly all Americans reject foreign money entering our politics through any channel, much less through alleged charities. That's why states keep passing laws to block federal funds, foreign funds. Only this past week, Alabama and Michigan saw houses of their state legislatures pass bills to prohibit foreign nationals from contributing to ballot measure committees. On the federal level, this committee should consider whether 501c3 charities should continue to be allowed to engage in ballot initiative campaigns, given that charities have no limit on their spending and may receive unlimited foreign funding. The committee should also consider whether charities should be allowed to engage in voter registration, given the documented abuses by charities who flout laws and regulations that only permit this when it's done in a nonpartisan manner. Charities that hire Democratic micro-targeting firms to help register voters are laughing at your tax code. Thank God Americans give generously to nonprofits. They give because they want nonprofits to help people. They don't want anyone, especially foreigners, to use politicized nonprofits to manipulate people.
Concerns over the link between radical 501c3 organizations that actively cause violence and unrest across the country and the Chinese Communist Party. Most notably being the over $20 million that the People's Forum received from Mr. Neville Roy Singham. The CCP is taking advantage of our tax-exempt sector to poison our dialogue and cause division in our political system. That should alarm every single person, whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat. If you are an American, you should be extremely concerned with what's going on at the expense of our tax-exempt status. Mr. Walter, the CCP's involvement in our tax-exempt sector is one of many ways that China has sought to harm America's national interest. Can you please walk through Mr. Singham's web, the big web of nonprofits, and explain how the CCP is using our tax-exempt sector to push CCP propaganda?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I have to say that some of this is speculative because so little is known for certain, and like a good Maoist, Mr. Singham works hard to hide what he's doing, and our nonprofit sector makes that easy. But there's been some very good reporting, especially from the New York Times on this, which uses the number hundreds of millions of dollars Mr. Singham has spent to try to influence politics in America and other countries as well, through a vast number of groups. All those groups do different things, but one thing they do is exactly what you say. They all push communist China propaganda. As the New York Times is perfectly clear, none of them are registered under FARA, as the Times also points out. They do all kinds of things like the People's Forum, as you said. It both trains and organizes for protests on multiple issues all over America. Other groups operate YouTube channels to reach youth. Others operate fake news websites. Still more, lobby Congress, operate the Tricontinental Institute, a Marxist think tank, support candidates for office in multiple countries. And in all cases, by the way, they don't just boost the communist government of China, they also support other hostile regimes. For instance, the No Dut Doll group connected to Singham propagandizes for the gruesome dictatorship of North Korea. Singham's wife, Jody Evans, helps operate Code Pink, and of course their protests famously include disrupting hearings in Congress, which shows their contempt for America and their contempt for the rule of law. So I think this is clearly something that needs additional investigation from multiple parts of the executive branch, and I applaud your investigating it here.
This committee, on a bipartisan basis, approved multiple bills to address the attempt by multiple foreigners to influence our politics and election outcomes by funneling money through tax-exempt organizations. But when those same bills came to the House floor, our Democrat colleagues ended up opposing them. They sided with special interest and foreign billionaires and abandoned this bipartisan cause. Similarly, today's minority witness shows that the Democrats would rather focus their time on opposing Donald Trump than working with us on this important issue. It seems opposing the president is the only thing that unites my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Maybe my colleagues across the aisle want to talk about President Trump because they don't want to talk about the individuals funding these groups. We know of two notable examples, a Swiss billionaire and a British billionaire who have attempted to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into left-wing tax-exempt organizations operating right here in the US for the purpose of influencing our elections, which is illegal, absolutely illegal. Ms. Sutherland? Of foreign influence and foreign funding in our politics, and what sort of action should we or the IRS be looking at to combat it?
Chairman Smith, thank you very much for that question. It's unfortunately all too common that foreign billionaires and foreign charities seem to have their thumb on the scale of American politics. Yes, we know that Hans-Jörg Wyss has funneled hundreds of millions of dollars, as has Christopher Hohn, and a smattering of foreign charities. Together, that identifies $2.7 billion of foreign money running through the nonprofit sector. That is a shocking amount to both the right and the left. And you notice that while these bills passed on a bipartisan basis but failed on the floor, perhaps it is because the top 501c4 on the left, the 1630 Fund, has received $280 million from Hans-Jörg Wyss, whereas the top 501c4s on the right, One Nation and American Action Network, have an internal prohibition on accepting money from foreign nationals. This is something that we must address, and I applaud your committee for taking action. The IRS and this committee must find a way that foreign nationals are prohibited once and for all from funding policy campaigns and issue advocacy campaigns right here in America.
Every Republican member of this committee recently called on the IRS to crack down on certain tax-exempt organizations because our investigations have exposed a pattern of abuse, deception, and blatant disregard for the law. In fact, to date, we have found cause to refer 11 different organizations to the IRS for potential revocation of their tax-exempt status. Mr. Dubinsky, as a forensic accountant who investigates complex financial transactions, what sort of practices could IRS criminal investigation adopt to better track the flow of foreign money through the complex web of entities involved and safeguard taxpayer dollars?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. You know, when you look at the situation, by the time it gets to IRS CI, criminal investigation, there's allegations of serious misconduct. I think we need to take a look, and the committee needs to look at what can the IRS do on a proactive basis up front by getting more information from the reporting from the 990 from the nonprofits, that the IRS can use that information and use artificial intelligence, I mentioned that in my opening statement, more effectively and efficiently to ferret out some of this behavior before it even gets to the CI level. Once it advances to a revenue agent who's doing the normal audit, they need the tools at that level to be able to look at the complex web of transactions, to be able to follow the money, to be able to see the transparency or unravel the transparency to see what's going on. At that point, when CI comes in, a referral is made to criminal investigation, they need the tools to do their job. They need better artificial intelligence programs. They need better computers. I've worked alongside with CI agents that have old technology. They need better training, technology. It's not that they need more manpower, but they need better tools to operate more efficiently and effectively. So I think it's a combination of starting in the front end with better reporting on the Form 990 that the nonprofits will have to disclose things like donor-advised funds. If there's a fiscal sponsorship, they have to check the box to that. At least some basic information that would flag things for the IRS that they could look across the entire spectrum of tax-exempt entities and have a flavor of better.
And not a right. I also know that what separates our country from so many others is the philanthropic efforts of many and investments in our economy that can deliver very positive results and create more opportunity for a lot of others. It's interesting when we see a debate taking place in California now that this so-called billionaire tax. Now, some politicians would say being a billionaire should be illegal. That disappoints me. That I guess stands to reason that would seemingly come from folks who just see America differently. And the demonization of prosperity, in fact, that you would never realize, given the demonization of prosperity out of Washington, D.C., you'd never realize that our tax code depends very heavily on financial success and that revenue that is important. And so now we have scenarios where folks have benefited off of the U.S. economy, and now they want to undermine it. We have to ask ourselves the question, why and how could that be? This debate taking place in California, though, on the billionaire tax, it's interesting that the governor now opposes that. I assume it's because he's concerned about more folks moving out of the state of California, as has been the case. Hearing the various names and entities, I know they've impacted elections in Nebraska. And our Attorney General, Mike Hilders, is looking into this, and I appreciate his steadfast review of that. But all the while, when we have these debates, I can't help but think of the good things that charitable activities can achieve. And yet, I fear that the bad stuff that's happening, shall I say the abuses as well, that are happening, I think should concern all of us. But Mr. Dubinsky, the term fiscal sponsorship is essentially an arrangement where a tax-exempt organization lends its status to a non-exempt party, allowing that party to receive tax-deductible contributions for its projects. Fairly simple approach here. While often used for legitimate incubation, it creates a structure where a private entity can effectively piggyback off the public's trust in 501c3 organizations. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's basically lending the tax-exempt status of one organization to another. There's supposed to be oversight from the sponsor to the non-sponsored organization or to the sponsored organization, but many times you'll see that there's not proper oversight, and that's where it becomes a slippery slope. So on its face, a fiscal sponsorship, there's no problem with it. But again, if it's misused for nefarious reasons, that's when you end up on that slippery slope, and there can be problems with it. So I think identifying, as I said earlier in the answer to a question in my opening remarks, identifying on the Form 990 if a tax-exempt organization is involved with fiscal sponsorships, just a simple checkbox. Another question on the Form 990 can arm the IRS with additional information. If they start to see, and maybe it goes further than that, maybe there are some more sub-questions. If you do have a fiscal sponsorship, and there's a series of questions underneath that, would arm the IRS with the information they need to then properly see if it's legitimate, if they need to investigate further. You know, this is all about following the money. I come back to this all the time as a forensic accountant. You have to follow the money and see who's paying it, why it's being paid, what's the substance of the transaction, not so much the form, but what's the true underlying substance of that transaction.
Right, and I think you touched on ultimately what my concerns are. You know, why would an established charity take on the massive legal and even financial liability of sponsoring a non-exempt project? I think Well, go ahead.
Yeah, look, there could be legitimate reasons for doing so. If the nonprofit doesn't have the manpower or the specific expertise in furtherance of the charitable cause, another organization may have that, and it's proper to have a fiscal sponsorship. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's done quite often. But if you take that situation and abuse it, that's where trouble can occur. So again, it's about transparency or the lack thereof. When things are opaque and you can't see through them, that's when bad actors start to manipulate the system, and that's what we're starting to see. That's what needs to be changed.
And you think we can appropriately kind of root that out or split that up?
I do. I think we need to start somewhere. I think, and starting with the forms, I know there was a comment about the IRS has lost 27,000 people. It's not about the manpower at the IRS, so to speak. It's about the expertise to work smarter and more efficiently. I work alongside revenue agents and criminal investigators all the time. They're wonderful people. They're smart. They need the tools, and that funding for tools is important. It's not a matter of body count or head count in that perspective, but training the right people and having the information come in on the front end that they can act on in a timely fashion.
Would the gentleman yield?
Thank you. My time has expired. That would be up to the chair.
Richie, I'll recognize you first.
So is the witness suggesting that a cut of 20?
Because the subject is really about where are these dollars going and what are they funding. I'm amazed that people can travel all over the country and go from demonstration to demonstration. I don't know who pays for their airfare. I don't know who pays for their hotel, who pays for their food, who makes up these elaborate signs that they seem to be able to unload under somebody's trunk. Most of the places I go when I'm up for an election are kids with a sheet of paper that they use magic marker. So I'm fascinated that we got so far off from where we're supposed to be. Now, Mr. Sohn, from a national security perspective, how concerning is this model of foreign-linked donor networks embedding themselves within U.S. protest infrastructure? Somebody's picking up the tab.
Yes. So from a simple, let's take the example of CARE California. So with CARE California, they they had an EIN number for CARE California, and they got millions of dollars in taxpayer grants, and they were supposed to administer those grants to independent registered entities. And Senate Judiciary Committee started asking a few questions about whether or not that money was directed back into CARE California itself or was directed out to third-party independent registered entities. And the head of CARE California voluntarily sent a letter back to Congress stating that they had no authority over those funds. And it was a grant designed, as I mentioned earlier, to help support Afghan refugees that had supported U.S. mission overseas. So it's just very hard to believe that some of these instances are accidents, because when you have that level of funding that comes from taxpayers, and then the money is basically self-dealt right back into the same organization, that's not an accident. So I do think it requires further investigation. In terms of some of the other conversation happening here, and I don't know if I'm permitted to just mention this quickly, is the operative word I thought in this session this morning would be around transparency. I mean, there's not an American that doesn't know whether or not it's right or wrong or about the jets and all of that. But they're not showing up in my community. They're not, when my daughter wants to go to Rockefeller Center during Christmas at 16 years old with her friends, I was afraid that I knew that from my knowledge and the work that I do with the NCRI, that there were going to be severe demonstrations that could be blocking hospitals, that could be blocking this lighting of the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. These are things that I worry about with my teenage daughter. So this is coming to our communities at home. And it's how is this money getting into the hands of these individuals that are stampeding our communities? And we need infrastructure in place that can match the level of the threat that's meeting us on the streets of our own communities. And I think the transparency is what I'm hoping that we could accomplish here this morning, is to really set in place an infrastructure that can identify these problems, where the money's coming in and how it's getting into the hands of these people, like you say, that are often sowing dissent and breaking the trust between Americans themselves.
Well, thank you for bringing it back to the real reason we're supposed to have the hearing today. I wish we could just stay on policy and not politics. I know it's very difficult to do. It was difficult for our for ourselves with the previous administration. I think the American people are more concerned about who is it that's funding something as opposed to which party thinks that their previous person got more than this person. I'm tired of hearing about jets and ballrooms and everything else. I got to tell you, I've always been worried about the 6th and the 21st of every month, and people said, what is that for? I said, those were paydays at my business, and I was really concerned with it. I'll tell you what, I'm fed up. I'm fed up with paying an incredible amount of taxes when we're successful and watching it dribble into every possible thing that we could put it into. And that bottom line, nobody's kidding anybody. You talk about buying votes. The way you buy votes is offer something to people that they say, I think I'm getting this for nothing. I said, no, you didn't get it for nothing. Hard-working American taxpayers fund everything. I want to thank you for taking a day out of your lives to be here. I appreciate all your opinions. Let's stay on the subject of who is doing what to whom, as opposed to a political battle over something. Look, I know you all don't like President Trump. We didn't particularly care for President Biden, but at the end of the day, I never called him Biden. I called him President Biden, and I'm always going to call Mr. Trump President Trump because that just happens to be what they're doing.